getting so confused speaking. It's like a tongue twister.
Yeah.
He, she,
Yeah.
what? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Wondering Christians podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about transgenderism. This being where a man thinks he is a woman, and a woman thinks she is a man, or that a man dresses up as a woman, or that a woman dresses up as a man. It can go a bit deeper than that, though, as I continue upon this long rant of the complexities of LGBT, in that gender seems to no longer be in existence, and yet at the same time isn't existence, in the sense that people can choose what gender they are based upon their Twitter profile, and that it is totally subjective. Before the podcast, we were talking about Caitlyn Jenner, and I think this is actually quite a good place to start, really, because I think Caitlyn Jenner, or rather Bruce, is probably one of the most well-known transgender males. Is that correct?
Transgender females.
Transgender female to be around at the moment, you know. While she was known as Bruce, she won a Olympic medal, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe a couple, I don't know.
Yeah, she got herself various other career achievements as well, before eventually turning into a female, or declaring herself a female, should I say, as opposed to magically turning herself into a female. I'm getting so confused speaking. It's like a tongue twister.
Yeah.
He, she, what? But anyway, yeah, when she declared herself a female, or he declared herself a female, I'll just go with she for now.
Mm-hmm.
She took on various acting careers and like documentary, with various documentaries and so on about her life and various other people's lives as well. And quite recently, she announced that she was running for governor of California.
Yeah.
So I think in regards to this, what we should look at is what do you think made Caitlyn Jenner, or Bruce? Do you know what Bruce reminds me of? It reminds me of that shark of Finding Nemo. Do you remember?
Ooh, really? Oh man. Okay. I was not expecting that comparison.
So the shark's called Bruce, isn't it? Wants to eat the fish.
I don't know. Oh, okay. Okay. That makes more sense. Yeah.
Maybe that's why he decided to turn into... I'm not going to go down that road, actually.
No.
Just didn't like the film very much. And he was like, nah, sod this. Needs an excuse to change my name.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is, well, Gomes, what do you think was the reasoning why she wanted to, or he wanted to become a woman? What would you say the cause is?
Oof. Well, to be honest, I think so. She wrote, I think they call it memoirs or biographies or something. So she wrote on that subject already. However, I'm not too sure. Like, if I had to say, I'm not sure if she felt like she was a woman before, whilst she was like an Olympic athlete. If she had that in mind, if it was some kind of transformation she endured afterwards. I don't think it's something like she wanted to stay as a celebrity, so she did something radical. I mean, because it's just too radical of a change. So I guess she got confused, or she was already confused.
Yeah, I agree with that statement, and I think, you know, they get this idea into their heads that they are, for whatever reason, stuck in the incorrect body, and that their body mismatches. It doesn't fit with their mental state.
Uh-huh.
And because it doesn't fit with their mental state, because they perceive of this supposed mismatch, they believe that they are not representing their true identity.
Yeah.
And so they have to change, they have to do something to better reflect their own identity. Mm-hmm. And so within their mental capacity, they see that they are close to being a female, and therefore they must, and go from anywhere along the scale as dress up
Yeah.
as a woman to having multiple surgeries and chopping your ding dong off,
Mm-hmm.
and then having surgeries with that as well, and essentially bodily mutations, really.
Yeah.
Mutilation, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are like the main types. There's also this more recent one, which is just a natural and logical extension of just the old version or the old-time version of transgenderism, which, for example, what Caitlyn Jenner is. But there's this newer version where it's just whatever you feel like you are at the day, you can just be that. You don't even have to dress differently. I mean, you can be a man and just feel like you're a woman and say that you should call me she. And I'm not sure, and that would be considered transgender. And they don't even change, they don't take hormones, they don't mutilate their body, they don't dress up as they just continue in life. And that really shows this true relativism. I mean, even transgenderism before, for Caitlyn Jenner's time when she transitioned, or even before that, it was more of a, okay, I'm gonna transition from a man to a woman, and I'm gonna be a woman, and there's a clear definition of what a woman is, and you dress a certain way, longer hair, etc. And even people that mutilate their bodies, because they want to be a woman and they know what a woman is. It's they have a vagina and all the other characteristics, etc. But nowadays, it's so relative that you can just claim to be a woman and have no characteristics of females, or the defining characteristics of females. So it's gone all the way to that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a philosophical dualism again between the mind and the body.
Yeah.
And whereas science would normally suggest that to be female is related to the body, a transgender person would say that what makes a person female is simply related to the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have these potential two extremes, which both have partial truth, but they're also totally, they're not very good redundant either.
Yeah.
And so what the transgender people do, the way these people think is they have this one box called man, and they have a second box called woman. And within these two categories, there are a fixed set of characteristics. And if you have more in one box than the other, then, so let's say you are biologically a man, however, you supposedly have more characteristics that are more stereotypical of a woman, then you are therefore not a man. And it would be in your best interests. It would be a better representation of your identity if you just changed to a woman. It's pretty much that shallow, to be honest.
And it goes against to what I think when I was a kid, the feminist agenda was, which was everything is asexual, agendered, asex, which would be, there's no toys for boys, no toys for girls. It's toys for everything because, there's no difference and etc. But transgenderism is is the opposite of that. There's a man, the male and female. They have, as you said, clear characteristics. And if you feel like you have more of one, then you should identify as that. So it's so contradictory, and I don't know how all these things manage to live in balance in someone's mind.
It is weird how we live in such a world where kind of like people, for example, those who cry racism are usually the most racist, or those who cry about there not being boundaries between genders are the most the biggest perpetrators of doing exactly that.
Exactly.
And so on.
I mean, yeah. I mean, they're literally getting into a bit earlier on in the podcast, but they are literally, for example, if a boy is born, okay, and 3 years after he's born, they're literally changing his gender because he likes pink clothes and he likes wearing dresses and playing with dolls, and they say, oh no, he's not a boy, he's a girl, and that's the opposite of what feminism was when I grew up. So it's crazy, and so I think let's maybe we could go through the various definitions of transgenderism. We've gone through it a bit, so should we do that?
Be my guest.
Okay, so I'm not too sure about what it was like in the ancient times. I don't want to go too far with this, but in the ancient times, I think in the homosexuality podcast, the previous podcast, we talked a bit about this, but there was transgenderism before. It was normally associated with slavery as well, sexual slaves, etc.
In ancient times, there was kind of like a status of transgenderism, but I think it was more just dressing up. I don't think people legitimately thought them as a woman if it was a man dressing up.
Yeah, they were, and it's sometimes they did. Many of the times they did mutilate their, like a king or whatever would mutilate their servants just for fun or sexual reasons or whatever, and they weren't seen as like, okay, now you can go along and live your life normally as a woman. No, you're just like a sexual slave, and the king is doing crazy things on you, cutting up your body, etc. But anyways, nowadays, and maybe going back 50 years, I think the first class of transgenderism was people that just dress themselves as females or just dress themselves as males, with dresses or whatever. And that was, I think nowadays we call that drag queens, something like that, or transvestites or something like that. But that's, I mean, that's not as necessarily as common now. People normally go through hormone treatments, which is the next part. So people, this would be Caitlyn Jenner's category. I think she went through hormone treatments. If she didn't, something similar. People that mutilate their body, and they literally they believe they're male, imagine they're a male, and they literally say, no, I'm a woman, and they go through operations and they look like women. I knew a male guy. I knew him later on in life, but before he was a guy, and he transitioned to a woman, and then all the operations, etc. Then he became a Christian, and he transitioned back to a male. And now he's just a normal guy, but it kind of looks like an effeminate guy, I guess, with some operation, because not all the operations managed to be reversed. And then, as I said before, the next step is this new gender fluidity. So up till then, there was gender and sex were still man and woman, and you would transition between male and female, etc. And then there's this newer version, not the newest, but the newer version, where there's a difference between sex and gender, where sex is your biological sex. Your chromosomes, they define who you are. You can't change that. It's in your DNA or genes or whatever. But there is this other more malleable thing, which is gender, and you can be whatever gender you want. Even create genders. You can create, I'm a gender non-binary something. Non-binary means not man or woman. Binary is like 0, 1 in computer programming, and for this type of language, for sexual language, it would be male or female. And so someone saying they're non-binary, they're just saying that this created gender. And And people would still say, okay, when the baby's born, the doctor will give them their sex, but later on they can change their gender, and their gender is super subjective, etc. And now the newest form, and obviously as time progresses and as these new ideas come in, if you believe the old idea, you're just transphobe, a homophobe, everything phobe. So you have to always keep up with the newest idea and the newest indoctrination. So the latest one is that there's neither sex nor gender, or they're both just created social things, social ideas. So there's no such thing as a woman necessarily, no such thing as a man. It's all this one spectrum of gender and gender identity and sex.
Can I just ask a question there?
Yeah.
While you're on that subject, have you ever heard of the term? I can't really pronounce it. I don't think anybody can really pronounce it, but it sounds like womex.
Yeah.
Manax.
Yeah. I've heard of Latin X. They do that because it's like instead of calling someone a Latino, which would be a guy, hey, he's Latino, which means he's a guy, he's a Southern American male, and a Latina would be a Southern American woman. However, they use Latin X because the X you can substitute for any. It means like there's no necessary definition. That's kind of what it means. Yeah. Was that gonna be your question? Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you answered the question right there, mate. That was good.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like this mathematical variable which you can just substitute for any letter you want. And we didn't even talk about this in the previous podcast, but this accompanied the sexual orientation side of things as well. We only really talked about maybe bisexual and homosexual in the previous podcast, but likewise I had a friend that called himself a demisexual, which, I mean...
A demisexual?
Yeah. So...
What?
I mean, I think it was basically bisexual, but he wanted to sound special. No offense to him. He was a cool guy. But...
Yeah.
And I think he liked Greek gods and demigods and whatever, the mythology, so... He just decided to call himself demi. A lot of this has to do with people having to feel special as well.
I guess that makes me a trisexual.
Yeah, I mean, and so here's the idea, and here's the crazy thing: saying homosexual is very, it's on the line of being transphobic because you are saying that there's one that gender does exist, and then especially saying bisexual. Bisexual, it's not even disexual, because disexual would be two genders, right? Or duosexual or something. That you're sexually attracted to two genders. But bisexual means both genders, and it implies that there's only two. The word bisexual implies that there's only two genders, which is true, but it's against the trans indoctrination ideas. So I think being bisexual is transphobic. And being transsexual is biphobic. So
yeah, that whole evolutionary line of transgenderism and transgender terms you've just explained there really well demonstrates how, if this continues, where it's going to go and where it's going to end. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to end with the entire kind of English language being blown to bits.
Yeah. And
the identity of males and females being strewn across the walls like some Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah, and I mean, this is so interesting because it's, as we're going through this series of human identity and sexuality, we can see the de-evolution, I guess you could say, of the human mind, where we kind of, we had logical ideas, etc., and then step by step things started being degraded and distorted. So now, because of the previous things that happened and homosexuality revolution and all those things, these even crazier ideas to be blunt, they are a bit even more crazier. They can only happen because of what happened previously.
Yeah, and I think like a massive thing that's becoming apparent now is that because this stuff is being taught in schools now.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of the transgender unicorn?
Okay, it's not unfamiliar. I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, that kind of stuff's being taught in schools now, and
But tell me what. Okay, so I've heard of that, and I know that somehow unicorn. I don't know, but explain that to me. I can't remember exactly.
so I think if I remember correctly, and I'm just looking it up now,
Okay.
is it kind of shows that everything is fluid, whether that be the gender identity,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be gender expression / presentation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that when I was saying earlier, where they kind of put stuff in boxes of male and female, and if you're more in one box, then you must be a female.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in the gender expressions, you kind of have feminine, masculine, and other.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the sex assigned at birth, the sexually attracted to, and the romantically, emotionally attracted to.
Mm.
What it kind of says, it says everything's fluid, and that everything in a human being is just kind of like split up into these man-made sections,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And it's fairly grim, but you're getting an increased amount of children now, as well as teenagers, coming out and believing that,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if they're a boy, then they're coming out believing that they're actually a woman and that they're born in the wrong body and so on. These young kids going into hospitals, getting these
Mm-hmm.
hormone treatments and having these surgeries and stuff, thinking that if they have this, then they're
Mm-hmm.
going to change, and then they're going to have their true identity, and it's going to solve all of their emotional
Mm-hmm.
problems for them. And then they have, they all these people, whatever age, they go off and many of them go off and have these surgeries. They have these hormone treatments, and sometimes this isn't even like with the parents' permission now, which is what's really scary.
Mm-hmm.
And they're having all of this done to them, and then they wake up from surgery, and then a few months later they're like, oh no, I don't actually feel any different now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some of them even feel even worse, and quite a number of them are reverting back to their, they are embracing their God-given identity
Yeah.
instead now. And they're actually going on YouTube and other platforms and saying, no, don't do this, don't listen to them. This is really, really freaking bad. And it does just go to show that this isn't, this isn't going to solve your emotional problems.
It's just I pulled up a list here of possible genders that people have created, and I guess this is antiquated already because as
Can I guess how many there are on the list?
go on.
Are there about 150?
No. 64.
64. Flip.
64
That's
64
still a lot.
terms or something, but like not a lot. There's a lot. That's what I was going to say. This is antiquated because, as we now know, Peter, gender, there aren't many genders. There's infinite number of genders because it's a spectrum, just like the light spectrum, or I guess you could say the spectrum of numbers that goes from minus infinity to plus infinity. This has infinite that you can be in. You can just create. You can be so unique and create one gender that only you can have. But let me read you some names. So there's Alia gender, which is a non-binary gender identity that doesn't fit into an existing gender schemas or constructs.
How stunning.
There's androgyne, someone who has a gender presentation or identity that's gender neutral and androgynous, or has both masculine and female characteristics. There's boy, BOI, a term primarily used in the LGBTQIA+ communities that typically describes someone who has a presentation, sexuality, or gender that is considered boyish. There's butch, primarily
I was
used.
expecting you to say that boys in BOI stands for a person who identifies as one of those things that float in the ocean.
All right, this is cissexism. Cissexism. Demi boy. Oh, here's a demi boy. Let me see. Demi boy. This non-binary gender identity describes someone who partially identifies as a boy, man, or masculine. Okay. Demian by. Demienby. Anyway, I mean that. I think you get the point, which is just this is crazy talk.
Do they get hard to pronounce the farther down the list you go?
There's the femme. I think this is the French version. FEMME. Le femme. I identify as le femme. Anyway, gender apathetic.
I identify as le baguette.
Le baguette. This is what you would probably. This is. I mean, we go back to, and then there's the crazy thing with the pronouns, which is a person is they. Give them. You would say give them the cup, but you're referring to one person, or z, or them, or ze, or ziers. I don't know, crazy thing. This I was gonna say this a couple years back. If someone told you this, you would think they ran out of one of those mental asylum institution things, because this is so crazy. And this is we're laughing about it now. But in Canada, there's an example of what you were talking about before, which is a kid transitioning. So this is,
Right.
I think, I'm not sure the age, but I think it's less than like 13 years of age. And the mother is some kind of liberal, and she's telling her daughter, and her daughter believes she's a boy. Or the other way around. I think it's a boy. It's like a boy that believes she's a girl, or a girl that believes she's a boy. And her mother's encouraging this. And the father is totally against it. And they went to court, and they're basically taking away the girl or the boy from their father.
I thought they jailed the father.
I'm not sure if they jailed him. They probably did for a time.
I've just typed it up now.
Yeah, Canada is the most liberal English-speaking country of the Anglosphere. Without a doubt. So this is happening in Canada right now. So, and laws are going to be passed maybe in the United States. I was hearing a guy speak about this, called the Equality Act. And it all sounds good, the name Equality Act, but it's going to be like the public schools can transition through with hormones, etc., your children if they want to, without the parents knowing. Stuff like that, crazy things. And I'm not sure how much of that is true and how bad it's going to be in practice if it does get passed. But these are the ideas floating around. And the health minister of the United States, I think it's the health minister, she's transgender, or he is a transgender woman. So, it's crazy that this is permissible. Gender dysphoria should be taken as a disease, and which it is, and not encouraged and taught to little children. But yeah,
definitely. And I do just want to touch on the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
In Deuteronomy,
Yep.
chapter 22, verse 5, reading from the NIV, it does state that a woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wears women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this, close quote. The issue I have with the transgender philosophy is how much it actually devalues the body, and as a result devalues the person, and how shallow the transgender philosophy is, within the sense that you're either within this box of male or you're within this box of female characteristics. And if you're a male who has slightly more feminine characteristics, then you're going to be pushed to transition to to be a transgender woman, and I think this runs completely counteract to the Bible, where the Bible. The Bible states that God created a man and woman, and that we were good, right?
Yeah.
And the amount of
Yeah.
value that a man and a woman has is huge, and we were made for one another. In fact, it states in, I think it's Genesis, early on in Genesis, that a man leaves his mother and father to be united with his wife and to become one flesh, which really does summarize, I think, fairly well the roles of those, the male and the female. It's, from the biblical perspective, it's okay to be a man and have so-called more feminine characteristics. You're still a man. That the feminine characteristics are arguably the subjective things. We live in the 21st century, and the transgender lobby will say that doing certain actions will suggest you're more feminine. However, that is by no means necessarily objective at all. And so my argument is that the transgender or the LGBT lobby is rejecting the objective and trying to promote their own thing using the subjective or relative, as you were saying.
And even if it's true, there are guys that are more effeminate and have more female mental characteristics and stuff, and women that are, as I guess we'd call them, tomboys, or basically have more masculine characteristics. That does exist. However, that doesn't mean you should. That doesn't mean you should mutilate your body or in any way, or take hormones or anything to become even more that. You just created a man with more effeminate qualities, and that's not the summation of your existence. That's just a fact, and that can change or not change. It doesn't really matter, but your gender and your sex is not how effeminate or masculine you are. It's just something that you're born with, and that's it. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that can be the exact same height, and one person for some reason might feel taller than the other. I mean, not comparing themselves to each other, but like in the midst of a crowd, you might think that you're taller than everyone else, or you might feel taller, but they're still the exact same height. Does that comparison make sense, or is it confusing?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so imagine if you're 1.90 m and you're in just in a random crowd. You might in a crowd with small people or whatever. You might feel tall. Yeah, you're 1.90 m, and then you might go to another crowd or whatnot and feel like you're just the average size. And I'm sure there's societies where if you go to Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, a lot of guys from the West will feel more effeminate, and if some Russian guy flies from Siberia to San Francisco, he's gonna feel like the most masculine. He's gonna feel like a bear or something. So, yeah, and the Bible's completely true. The verse you said in Deuteronomy and the one in Genesis, which is Genesis 1:27, it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." So, there's male and female. Now, I think we need to touch quickly on the idea that there are people that are born with certain mutations where I think they have an extra chromosome, and this is the very, very small percentage of people. There are some mutations. Some guy I've heard that there are people that are born with both genders' reproductive organs. I've heard of girls that are not born with beards, but that naturally grow beards because of hormone issues. That that's a different topic. Sometimes you can tell if it's a guy or a girl, and then again, however, but if they do have a third chromosome, that's just so rare. I'm not too sure. That might even be considered transgender. That might be the true transgender thing, but it's not something people strive towards. It's again something they're born with. We need to keep our foundation in the Bible and what it says, and it's very clear on this subject. And it when it talks about women not lying with a male, it's kind of talking about the same thing. How if you you lie with a transgender woman, then that's not good. That's against the law, because they are a man, they are a woman, they stay male, they stay female. We need to be grounded in that. And all these social issues, we didn't even touch on the most culturally relevant one, which is transgenders in sports, which is being the main secular pushback against transgenderism. We can't have guys that call themselves women participating in female sports. Otherwise, there won't be female sports, because guys will always win, because guys are guys and they're just naturally stronger.
Yeah, I think there was a video of a time when in America, I think it was, that they let a male to female wrestler compete against a female wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my goodness, the male to female absolutely battered.
Yeah, I think they broke the girl's skull, I think. So that's just that's a secular pushback, and it's totally valid. I encourage everyone to look at those arguments, etc. But again, the basis has to be the Bible, because in 10 years' time, things are going to be very different. It was the same thing with the homosexuality debate. Whilst Barack Obama was running for president, he would not dare to say that he was for homosexual marriage, yet he signed it into law happily. So if we just ride the waves with secularism, they change their opinions very quickly, especially nowadays. So if we stay grounded in the Bible, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, just to conclude really what we've gone over in this episode then, we've looked at transgenderism, what it is, and we've looked at a few examples such as Caitlyn Jenner, and looking at various school kids as well, and how this kind of philosophy has impacted all kinds of people. We've really looked at how the transgender philosophy relies heavily on the subjective, basing it upon the mind and separating the mind from the body, and seeing it as a one to end all, really. To if you have more characteristics as a man of a woman, then you are therefore a woman, for example. And to rebuttal that, really, we've looked at the Bible. I've looked at the value of the body and the mind, and how when they're together they are so much more valuable, as well as that the subjective things that the transgender lobby say that determine whether you're a man or a woman are, in fact, of course, totally subjective and are open to change over time. I mean, when we look at King David, for example, he wrote plenty of poetry and he danced before God. In fact, I think it was one of his wives who called it rather embarrassing and tried to get him to stop, And just going to say that the mind should work with the body. The mind really is part of the body, and that the value of it is so great. And we should use that as a temple to worship God. Anyway, I'll end it here. So thank you everybody for listening to this episode of The Wondering Christians. And I think on the next episode of this series, we are going to be looking at euthanasia. So thank you for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, Library, or anywhere else, make sure to give us a like if you have liked the episode, as well as smack that subscribe button. Thank you.